All right. I thought I would have Alexa read my
Is
latest
this your most
shorts.
recent book, The Highwayman?
Yes, that's
The
correct.
Highwayman. A bony hand dipped a long pen into an inkwell filled with a reddish liquid. Satisfied with the fluid now inside the pen, a sickly man moved over to the muscular, naked body of a corpse strapped to a table. Candles burned in the corners of the room, and from atop a chandelier that hung high in the center, casting a soft glow into the surroundings. With careful and diligent movements, the sickly man dug the pen into the bare flesh of the body and began to etch strange markings onto flesh. Symbols and small phrases covered the skin until the entire body held a series of runes or words. The sickly man muttered phrases under his breath as he dipped his fingers into a bluish liquid and tossed it onto the body, which began to shake, and its eyes opened quickly. Jacob Lassiter opened his eyes and awoke in a pool of sweat. He rolled off his makeshift bedding and sat upon the cool desert sand near the smoldering fire of his campsite. Jacob pulled a blanket over his body and looked into the night sky. Purplish and yellow clouds dotted the horizon, and twinkling stars helped illuminate the dark. A pale moon cast enough light for Jacob to see, as the open landscape of the desert stretched on for miles upon miles. He rubbed his hands together and began to poke through the embers of his campfire. Jacob looked at his hands and pondered the tattoos that covered his entire body. Feeling cold, he scrounged dry twigs and tossed them onto the remaining embers, and they ignited. Soon his campfire burned, driving away the cold of a lonely desert night. Something had been bothering Jacob enough to where he could not sleep, and forced him awake. A dream, one that was unpleasant and vivid. Too vivid to be a dream, thought Jacob. A cold wind kicked up scathing sand, and Jacob felt a pain shoot across his temple. He covered his eyes with his palms, and visions began to flash into his brain. The images ran quickly through his mind, and scrolled across his eyes like a page of pictures from a tavern that held portrait across walls of a crowded room. Voices filled his ears, and he could hear an argument, then a gunshot, and people began to scream. Next, Jacob could see the sunrise and a noose. As quickly as the bizarre images appeared, they disappeared, and he heard light footsteps nearby. A steady hand produced a pistol from his blanket and a sharp rapier that he held near to his side. Jacob shifted and rose to his feet quickly, placing a black scarf over his tattooed mouth and nose, only allowing his slightly glowing blue eyes visible as a black hat covered his bald tattooed head. Jacob scanned the darkness and could pick out sounds through the unforgiving black canvas of the never-ending night. "If you want to fight, I can oblige," said Jacob. "I don't particularly want to kill anyone today, but if I have to, I will." Jacob moved his hand to his rapier and brandished the blade as he readied his pistol. "This is your last warning," said Jacob. The sound of steel scraping steel sought out Jacob's ears, its familiarity unmistakable as that of a swift strike cutting through the air and heading toward him. Jacob whirled around and blocked the oncoming blade with his rapier. Blue and green sparks scattered and disappeared into the night sky. Jacob swung his foot around and struck the feet of his assailant, knocking the man to the ground. He thrust his rapier forward to skewer his foe, but the man deftly rolled away, and Jacob's blade struck the desert sand. His foe had the advantage and raised his blade, sending a sweeping arc that left reddish trails through the sky toward Jacob's head. Knowing he didn't have time to block the attack, Jacob rolled to his right and shot his pistol, striking his foe in the chest, sending him crumpling to the ground. Jacob grabbed his rapier and moved the blade over to the man's jugular. He looked into his attacker's eyes and covered the man's mouth with his hand. He slowly slit the bastard's throat with his rapier and closed the dead, staring eyes. A piercing pain penetrated his skull, sending him to one knee, and a crippling pain filled his torso. The visions had returned with an intensity he had never experienced. He could see himself pushed and kicked through the streets of a town with a dirt road. A church bell sounded, and he watched as a line of men in front of him swung from a hangman's noose. Jacob's hands were bound securely and his feet in chains. The sun began to rise as a man lead him up upon a wooden platform. The visions changed, and he found himself in a barn with a young woman. They were naked, and the woman was lying near his side eating berries and smiling at him. Then the beautiful features of her face began to shift, and old gray lines replaced a vibrant smile. The barn disappeared and a rainstorm surrounded Jacob. Across from him stood a woman next to a white contraption he had never seen before. The woman held a long steel blade he was not familiar with except for the likes of legends from the Orient. Long blonde hair gently draped around her shoulders and moved in the wind. She wore a helmet that covered her face. The woman opened the visor of the helmet, and a white light cascaded over Jacob's body, and his tattoos began to glow orange in the light, and his skin burned badly, sending him to one knee. She moved toward him and pushed the blade against his chest over his heart, and nicked his skin with the sharp tip of merciless steel. The rain began to slow, and the orange sun rose quickly as red clouds rushed by. A bright blue light flashed behind the woman and illuminated the horizon as the red clouds turned to purple and green, until a blue sky now hung overhead. Jacob felt the noose around his neck, and he looked upon the angry crowd. That is when the blade of the woman sliced through the air and cut the rope from the gallows, and Jacob fell to the ground. "Your time is not now," said a voice that reminded Jacob of the comfort from a garden he would sit in as a babe. A wonderful field filled with nasturtium plants and cornflowers that gently moved in the breeze of a quiet afternoon, as wildflowers offered up nectar for bees and butterflies. The visions passed as soon as they had appeared, and Jacob found himself at his campfire. He decided it would be wise to bury the body of his attacker after he looted the belongings and move on. He still needed to reach Esther in a fortnight's time. He had unfinished business there with the blacksmith and heard about a monk who might know information about his tattoos. Hopefully, the visions would pass. However, they had been getting worse, and who was that strange woman? This concludes The Highwayman by Jamie Horwath. I hope you've enjoyed listening.